We start off today with a little bit about Joe Biden's trade policy. Specifically, that's actually been tougher, especially on China, than I think a lot of people were expecting or are aware of. And so we're going to look at a few different elements of this that I find really interesting through the lens of a Seattle Times op-ed by Paul Kruger that was titled "Biden Gets Tough on Trade" that I found particularly interesting. And we'll just read a couple parts of this and then discuss, but all of it's fascinating, especially given the context that conservatives have run with the narrative for a while that Biden's all weak, he's a globalist, he's trying to help China. It just doesn't seem to be the case, right? So again, Biden Gets Tough on Trade is the title. And Krugman writes, "Remember when former President Donald Trump's trade wars were front page news? At this point, concerns over Trump's tariff policy seem almost quaint. Who cares if an insurrectionist is also a protectionist? But some of the tariffs Trump imposed are still in place. And on Friday, the World Trade Organization, which is supposed to enforce rules for global commerce, declared that the official rationale for these tariffs, that they were needed to protect U.S. national security, was illegitimate. And the Biden administration, in turn, told the WTO in startlingly blunt language to take a hike. So the WTO came to the Biden administration and said, these tariffs you've left imposed, they're not justified, take them away. And the Biden administration is saying, heck no, we don't care, we're leaving them. Then it continues, this is a very big deal, much bigger than Trump's tariff tantrums. The Biden administration has turned remarkably tough on trade in ways that make sense given the state of the world, but also make me very nervous. Trump may have huffed and puffed, but Biden is quietly shifting the basic foundations of the world economic order." And then the final little element we'll look at together, and then we'll talk about it, is from the tariffs that were imposed by Trump. Here's which ones Biden left and took away. As it happens, the tariffs on Canadian metals are gone, as are most of the similar tariffs on Europe, although the agreement there stops short of full free trade. But the tariffs on China are still in place. More important, the Biden administration has declared that the WTO has no jurisdiction in the matter. It's up to America to determine whether its trade actions are necessary for national security, and an international organization has no right to second guess that judgment. And the last part that I'll read, wait, what? According to the right, Biden and company are globalists, soft on China and unwilling to stand up for America. Why have they gotten so tough? And I love the last part I just read you that Krugman notes that conservatives have been screaming that Biden's so weak and he loves China and he wants to make them stronger than the United States or whatever the talking point was. And that just flies in the face of the recent events we're seeing where the Biden administration is having, a conflict with the WTO over that very issue because he's taking a more tough and aggressive stance. And so then the article goes on to speculate about why this is the stance that Biden's taking. And I think, interestingly, there is an awareness among, kind of in a bipartisan way, people in Washington and just kind of Americans as a whole increasingly, that while a lot of the conservative fear-mongering is just off with China and other countries, so often it's just off, the more general vibe and feeling that we need to stay competitive and maybe be a little bit more aggressive and make sure that China's influence doesn't necessarily become so much more significant because of the negative ramifications that could have. And the other country this notes is Russia. These autocratic nations, we don't necessarily want them to become so powerful that they now can influence the world in all these ways that won't be as democratic, that won't be as within the sets of values that we care about. And so that including, or additionally, you have just the purely economic possible downsides of that are very frightening if they were to be able to become way economically dominant compared to the United States. And so if we really do feel that in a bipartisan way, which it seems based on recent actions in Washington that is the case, then now is a good time to act on it. Biden seems to be heading up the charge on that. And so you have, with his trade policy, that being reflected, that we're going to be a little bit tougher towards China than previously expected. And also domestically with the legislation that he's passing and pushing for, the CHIPS Act, invest in semiconductor manufacturing and trying to make sure that we don't become beholden to countries like China because of the relevance and necessity of semiconductors. And then beyond that, in the Inflation Reduction Act, it has benefits for electric vehicles, but those are limited to to companies that are producing the electric vehicles that are American companies, right? And so that is pushing in that direction of prioritizing the interests of American industry over other industry. And so very interesting. Again, let me know what you think in the comments, because I know people have different stances on a very complex conversation of trade. But generally, it's fascinating to see that Biden's definitely not the caricature of a weak liberal that the conservatives have put out there. And this is a little bit different than I think you would have expected going into his presidency, but definitely is at least motivated by what I see as justified, a justified motivation to stay very competitive while also still pursuing mutually beneficial situations with China. Being competitive with them is important. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before any of the clips are uploaded to YouTube, plus get a full extra show every single Saturday, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Luke Beasley. That's patreon.com/Luke Beasley, and there's a link in the description.